Hi everybody. My goal today was to take you guys to the train station and talk a little bit about how to use the trains around here. But two things happened. One, Drew bailed on me. And then two, I went to the train station and currently it is a hangout for all the teenagers. In fact, I went to the train station in Ulstadt and the one in Murnau, and both are loaded with kids. I guess they got nowhere else to go. In fact, being such a pretty day, everybody is out, even though they're supposed to be under quarantine. So, instead what I thought I would do is talk a little bit about churches. As one of my good friends and great tour guide Jim Goodwin always used to say, it's not a tour without a church. So I figured I'd go ahead and knock it out while we're here. If you look behind me, you can see there's a beautiful example of a 17th century or 18th century church here in Bavaria. Most of these churches were built in the late 1600s or early 1700s, and their signature is that dome. That is a Catholic church. Isn't that crazy? All of our Catholic churches that were built in the 1700s and the late 1600s, well, not all, let me rephrase that. Most, 90% of our Catholic churches built during that time period have an onion dome on them. And it's all because of one thing, the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War, another thing that Jim once said, is you cannot talk about Bavaria, you cannot talk about Germany without talking about the 30 Years' War. That horrible conflict that lasted from 1618 to 1648. The great fight within the Holy Roman Empire to determine the dominant faith, Christian, i.e. Catholic, or Christian, i.e. Protestant. The Catholics versus the Protestants. It killed a lot of their people. I always use the number of 3/4, but it was a little bit less than that, but still, it was a huge number of people died during the 30 Years' War. Either war killed them, plague killed them, or starvation killed them. During that fight, you had about an 11-year period where there was a Swedish king by the name of Gustavus Adolphus, or also known as Gustav Adolf, who actually led this huge mercenary army of northern Germanics, Swedes, and Russians. And they came north and they beat the tar out of the Catholics. And they ended up getting all the way down here, all the way to Bavaria. Gustav's intention was to turn and then get on a very famous road, the Fern Pass, and eventually make his way all the way to the city of Vienna, where he would kill the Holy Roman Emperor, Ferdinand, and then, of course, take the title for himself and win the war. Problem was, he allowed the protection of the flank of his army. Let me rephrase it. I can't talk right now. I haven't given a tour in so long, I can't even remember how to talk. But he entrusted the protection of the flank of his army, the protection of his trade routes, the protection of his payment of his soldiers to one man, a man by the name of George of Saxony. And George betrayed him. And so Gustav couldn't pay his army. He ended up having to go north, reestablish his trade routes to France and to Sweden. And that gave the Catholics time. It gave a man by the name of Valen Stein time to raise a new mercenary army and force a decisive battle between the Catholics and the Protestants that happened here in Bavaria just outside of Ravensburg. Gustav Adolf, he won the battle, but he was killed. And then his army was basically a headless snake. The new general who was put in charge was an idiot in comparison to Gustav Adolf. And so he told his army, his mercenaries of northern Germanics, Swedes, and Russians, he said, hey guys, do me a favor, just stay here in Bavaria. Find a place to live, seek quarter. I'm going to go see if I can negotiate peace, or I'm going to go see if we can build a new army. And those soldiers, they were told to do one thing while they were here, to go to all these Catholic churches and reconsecrate them. How do you do that? Well, you take all the holy relics, the paintings, the statues, you take them out of the Catholic Church and you destroy them. And then you go to the Catholic priest and you tell him he has to become a Protestant priest. And if he doesn't, you kill him too. You bring in a new Protestant priest, you reconsecrate the altar. And as I say on my tours, Bob's your uncle. It's now a Protestant church. Well, famously, a lot of those churches were in bad disrepair by the end of the war in 1648. And some of those churches had a very distinct feature. And it was those onion domes that you see behind me. See those onion domes? You might recall, Gustav Adolf's army was made up of northern Germanics, Swedes, and Russians. And those Russians, famously, they weren't Protestant. So during that 11-year period where that mercenary army sought quarter here in Bavaria, those Russians would go to the Catholic churches. They would break off the pointy steeples, and they put onion domes on the top of the churches, making them Russian Orthodox churches. When the war was finally over in 1648, as I said, everybody was dead. I always use the example of 3/4 of the population gone here in Bavaria. Our king, Maximilian, he was desperate to rebuild his population. So Maximilian enacted all these new laws to try and get the people to make babies, as I always like to joke. And by the 1700s, his efforts had begun to pay off. And there was a new birth, a rebirth here in Bavaria. And it was heralded in by the merchants who were given newfound wealth and a right to own their own property. And one of the first things everybody wanted to do was rebuild their churches. You see, here in Bavaria, in southern Germany, they remained Catholic, whereas most of the rest of the Holy Roman Empire, after the Peace of Westphalia, became Protestant. And since Bavaria stayed Catholic, and since they wanted to rebuild their churches which were destroyed during the war, they needed help. And so they looked south to Italy. And Italian architects, painters, and artists, they all came north looking for work, rebuilding Bavaria's churches. And one of the first things some of those architects saw was these onion domes on the churches that were falling down, these old Russian Orthodox churches. And they liked them. And so they incorporated them into a new architectural style that began in the 1700s, which today is known as Rococo. And it was a mix between Italian Baroque and that old Bavarian architectural style that pre-existed prior to that. Somebody's giving me a lot of hearts. Yeah. When are you going to come back to visit, by the way? Also, yesterday I saw in the comments a couple of things. One, Jessica, you mentioned that in Unterammergau there was an old Vetterstein museum. Sadly, it's gone. That whole building fell into disrepair. The restaurant closed, everything, which is truly a shame because it was a great museum. They're building a new one here in Ulstadt, and so if I get a chance, as soon as they open it, I'll do a video for you guys to show you. Next thing, these videos, I want to start putting them on YouTube, but I don't know how. If anybody knows how, do me a favor, put a little comment in the notes below. And last but not least, what do you guys want to hear about? As I said, I'm kind of a history nerd, especially when it comes to Bavaria. If there's something you guys want to know about, or something you read about, or something you always wanted to see and you want me to talk about it, just let me know, because I got nothing else to do. And there's day 7 of the No Travel blog by All Things Garmisch and Bavarian Beer Vacations. Bye-bye, guys.